what I do think is true is that we do have to be honest about this is really not exciting, and I'm sure I'm not going to get a lot of like thumbs up or clicks for saying this, but we don't have a viable third party. We don't have a good Democratic Party. I don't know what the answer is right now, except I do think that, certain things that are positive, we're seeing that people are out on the streets for Palestine. Of course, the policy hasn't changed, but as I often will point out, you don't get the policy changes until you get the shift in public opinion, right? So it's what we're seeing now is necessary but insufficient. But I wanted to actually ask you about, and I wish I had some big, grand plan for moving forward. I think that unfortunately, I don't think that the Democrats learn a lesson. I don't think it's like, oh, we didn't vote for them because of genocide, and now they're going to know that they can't support genocide anymore. I just don't think that's going to be the takeaway. But I actually want to ask you about if you could just end on discussing how the media has enabled the slaughter of Palestinians, the genocide of Palestinians, because this is something you talk about a lot. And also, you have a really fascinating piece on J Street and what an abomination J Street was. And I have to admit, I'm not a liberal Zionist. I think that liberal Zionism is inherently problematic. I personally think that people who are liberal Zionists are reachable in ways, perhaps, that right-wing Zionists are not reachable. That's kind of a slightly different discussion. But tell us what you found about J Street, and then talk about the role of the media in enabling this genocide.
Well, J Street kept from the beginning in October of 2020.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just realized not everyone. J Street is kind of like labels. Yeah. It presents itself as the liberal answer to AIPAC, right? And they're pro-peace.
Yes, they call themselves pro-Israel, pro-peace, which has clearly, to anyone watching, been an oxymoron, and very much aligned with the Democratic Party. Credit where due, they fought for the Iran nuclear deal. They're fighting for another Iran nuclear deal. But J Street, representing sort of an example, an incarnation of, as you say, liberal Zionism, wants to hold on to a dream that has sailed. That ship has sailed a long time ago, probably in 1948, but certainly it is an ongoing effort to square a circle. And what I found in writing about J Street for The Nation a couple of months ago was I went through at that point 130 different news releases from J Street between the fall of 2023 and this spring. They absolutely refused to acknowledge that Israel is engaged in genocide in Gaza, whereas Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International have documented it unequivocally. And J Street also has never been willing to call for an arms embargo against Israel while it continues the genocide. And so when we see, yes, there's all sort of, I don't doubt, sincere anguish that J Street leaders and members express about the suffering in Gaza, to be really candid, I believe that J Street represents a current of Jewish attitude in the United States that is anti-AIPAC, but also puts Jewish lives at a higher value than Palestinian lives. That's called racism. It's called ethnocentrism. You can call it whatever you want, but right now it is enabling genocide.
Were you, by the way, ever a Zionist? Were you raised as a Zionist? Do you come from a Zionist family?
Tacitly, when I was 12 and 13 years old and given a blue and white can to go and collect some coins for a tree in Israel, I sort of assumed that. But I broke with that in 1982 with the bombing of Beirut. And one of the things I'm more pleased by in my particular writing history is that Abe Foxman from ADL wrote a letter to editors of newspapers denouncing me in that year because of my article saying Israel is slaughtering innocent people in Lebanon. And I would just sort of, in a sense, sum up in this way. At that point, I was in a household with a peace advocate who worked for a peace and social justice organization. And she and I were reading the newspaper of the slaughter in Lebanon, in Beirut, the Shabra and Shatila massacres by the Israelis and their allies. And she was sobbing and she said, I can't speak out against Israel because I'll get fired. And this was an employee of a peace and justice organization. So I feel so angry still about this in the present day, but also I feel a lot of hope because of organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now, because we just have to fight back.
And final question for you is if you could just share with people your insights into how the media, I mean, you wrote an entire book about this, but how the media has enabled genocide in Gaza.
Tacitly and often explicitly, it's what lives really matter and what lives don't. And the empathetic coverage, for instance, of civilians who are killed by Russian bombs in Ukraine, that's what journalism should strive to do. But there's very little of that coverage in the last year and a half, that empathetic coverage in US media about the US taxpayer funded genocide and slaughter and maiming and terrorism by the Israeli government in Gaza. And there's a paradigm there, even when the coverage is empathetic, it's victims without victimizers. It shows you the suffering of an individual family. They're victims, but somehow it just sort of happens. The bombs fell from the sky. Who dropped the bombs? Who paid for the bombs? And that's the distinction. There are victimizers. They're at the top of the Israeli government. They're at the top of the US government. And when news media in the US, as they almost always do in mass media, evade that reality, then they are lying.
Right. So any kind of like things that people should be on the lookout for. It sounds like it's the word choice, right? Like slaughter, active voice versus passive voice, attributing it to people. So the Russians do this versus Palestinians are killed or Palestinians die. Yeah.
Yes, very much the adjectives used, the empathetic ones, the condemning words, the compassionate words, and also the silences are also extremely powerful. And so it's almost as though this suffering, which is just so horrific, according to the news media, Gaza, according to the US media, it just sort of is happening and disconnected from who's paying for the bombs, who's shipping the bombs, who's dropping them.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Norman. Everyone should check out Norman's work. Go to his website. He's very prolific. And anything else that you want to plug that you're working on?
For sure. We're doing a lot of organizing on these issues at rootsaction.org. And if you're not getting action alerts, please go to rootsaction.org and we'll be in touch.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Norman.
Thank you, Katie.